My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. We are living at a time when many are grieving the loss of loved ones with limited opportunity to say goodbye and participate in funerals and memorials. That grief may also extend to physical separation and isolation, the loss of employment, and other consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. How may we process this grief? Are there different types and degrees of grief? What may we offer others who are experiencing grief at this time? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Edie Nathan, is a grief therapist and expert on the grieving process. Edie Nathan is an author, public speaker, and licensed therapist. She's an ASECT certified sex therapist, hypnotherapist, and certified EMDR practitioner with more than 20 years of experience. In her expertise as a grief therapist, she interweaves her formal training as a psychotherapist with breathwork, guided imagery, ritual, and storytelling. She's been a guest expert on major news programs on CBS, NBC, and Fox, among others, and has contributed to major magazines and publications. Her practice is in New York City. Her website is edynathan.com. That's spelled EDYNATHAN.com. And she joins me this week to discuss her book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Edie Nathan. Welcome, Edie.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
And so wonderful to have you with us with what you have to offer at this critical time. So before we start, please share with us your path and how it led to your career.
You know, paths come in many different forms, and sometimes they're not so straightforward. So I would say that it was a culmination of a lot of losses, some that I can define as truly the loss of my first love when I was 27 years old. But before that, dealing with having been sexually abused and then facing the difficulty of having been a very overweight young girl and being bullied as a result. So there was a lot of grief. There was a lot of pain and vulnerability, and the structure of my life, it just felt like I was putting out one grief pile and then the next and then the next, and the internal mourning was really intense. When I lost my husband at 27, the love of my life, it was hard because I didn't have anywhere to go. Too often people were saying to me, "Oh, you're young, you're 27 years old, and you'll get over this, and you'll find another partner, and you're going to be fine." And I don't care how old you are when you lose a loved one, that's not the message. And as a result of his death, I changed my whole life. I was going to be a corporate trainer, but he really gave me the gift of being able to see, I'm kind of on a hero's journey, and I'm always facing, this ordinary life and moving out of this ordinary life and moving into the depths of trying to find what's going to be the next best thing. And it's going into the darkness and facing the enemy of the self or of the soul or of the pain, and then coming out and then creating a brand new ordinary life because you're forever changed. So in this being forever changed, I realized I could no longer really be in the corporate world, went back to school and decided, okay, I'm going to learn how to be a therapist, and I'm going to learn how to help people and help them hold their grief and their mourning, in a way that I needed. And so the work became kind of a work of duality. I'm going to heal myself. And as I heal myself, I'm going to learn how to be a witness to and help others heal.
It's interesting because not the loss of my partner or loved one, but a change in the relationship also led me to a change in my personal journey. Is that something that you find in a lot of cases?
Yes, yeah, I do. So often.
So that's not something that's uncommon, that many people go through something like that, especially in their late 20s, early or mid 30s.
Late 20s, early to mid 30s, even as we age as well. There is a new reckoning with the self, and sometimes you need to leave something because you're forever changed and your partner just can't go along with you any longer, can't see you. They only see you as it relates to them.
Fascinating. Now, you have a very interesting logo for your work. Please tell us about this symbol and what it means.
Oh, the Ouroboros. So the Ouroboros is actually, the original Ouroboros is a snake's head in a circle. Actually, it's the snake's body, and you see the head of the snake almost biting its tail, and it's a circle. And what I've created in this logo is actually an infinity using the two Ouroboroses. And it's really the idea of not only infinity, but of life and death and rebirth. And the grief, I look at grief as really going through that process of, number one, it's infinite. It's not something we get rid of. It's not something that we walk away from. It's something that we learn to dance with. We learn to integrate. So in this infinity, once we have lost someone or something dynamic has shifted in our lives where we experience that sense of grief and loss, it is then that we need to kind of die. Some part of us dies, and that doesn't mean, however, that another part of us doesn't get born. That in our reckoning with what we've lost, that something becomes illuminated. It might be that we learn something about ourselves that we never knew, that maybe we're stronger or maybe we're not as strong as we thought we were. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that there is an illumination when we partner with our grief.
An illumination.
And so that's what this is.
An illumination and a new opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. Yeah.
In the intro, I mentioned you're being an EMDR practitioner. For our listeners not familiar with this, please explain eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's why EMDR is so much easier to say.
That's right. So EMDR was actually it's a wonderful utilization of changing the way the brain holds on to trauma. And this is long before all of these wonderful studies came out around the brain and how really plastic the brain is. And it's, that is such exciting work, knowing how plastic the brain is. EMDR really takes the trauma, the memory of a trauma, the experience of the trauma, and it takes one aspect of that experience, almost like a sound bite, or if you think of an artichoke, it takes one leaf. The artichoke represents the entire narrative of that trauma. You take one leaf, you look at that one leaf from the artichoke, and you break it down. How are you holding it? What are your senses around it? What are your thoughts, or in psychobabble language, cognitions around this one aspect of this trauma? And then you rework it. You rework the negative thought into a more positive thought. You rework the images that go with that traumatic experience or that grief experience. And it can it can work. When I was studying this and learning how to use this wonderful tool technique, I had been in a car accident, and I could not, every time I drove by that one spot, I'd start to hyperventilate, sweat would start to pour down my back. When I did this EMDR session as a student wanting to learn how to do EMDR, what happened was we changed the way that I held the trauma, and we changed the message from this feels like a very dangerous spot to I'm alive and I survived and I'm okay. I'm okay. And what happened, one session, it was an hour and a half. And from that moment on, and it's been 20 years, every time I drive past that area, I'm fine. So it really is a brain changer in the way that we hold trauma.
That's wonderful. What other modalities do you offer your clients?
One of the things that I use a lot is hypnosis and meditation, but meditation not in the way that some people may think of it, in that, I'm not asking you to just sit down and be in your silence and let the thoughts move in and out, although that is part of it. The other part of it is intention. And so in a deeply, deeply relaxed state, and frankly, I mentioned hypnosis, and I don't know what comes up in your mind, and you're a learned man, but for some people, they're terrified of the idea of, oh my God, I'm going to lose control. I'm not going to be able to get out of this trance. And the reality is that if you drive and you get into a car and you're on the expressway and you go from exit 10 to exit 20, and I ask you, did you remember driving past those 10 exits? No, I didn't. Well, guess what? You've been in trance. And you've been driving this 2,500-pound car, but you've been in trance. And you're fine. So hypnosis, and combining hypnosis with some meditation, again, I'm working with the brain, because the brain is one of our greatest allies. And we want to change the way the brain is holding the grief, is holding the trauma, is holding the isolation, or what I call the big G's, loss of a loved one, and the images that go to those losses. And you might be angry at the loved one who died. You might be agitated or feel anxious. You might feel a loss of who am I in this process. So it's really a chance to change the pictures and change the narrative while you're in a guided meditative state.
My guest is Edie Nathan. Her book is called It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. We'll be back with more of Edie after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Edie Nathan. She's the author of It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Edie, in our first segment, you talked about your first experience with grief, the loss of your husband when you were 27 years old. In retrospect, what did that teach you?
It's such a good question, because there were so many lessons. I guess trust myself. Don't stay stuck, and honor the vulnerability of the grief and ask for help. That's what it taught me.
And how did you process it?
Initially, not well. Not well at all. I talk about this because I went through it. There was a lot of acting out. I ate too much. I probably drank a little bit more than I should. I didn't sleep, and I was just really a mess. And it wasn't until I said to myself, okay, I gotta harness in some energy here. I gotta do this differently, and asked for help. And asked for help from a really, really dear friend. And he was able to guide me and be there for me in so many ways, but especially to be truthful about the dilemma of grief that I was facing. And it was in that dilemma that I actually found some grace. Yeah. Yeah.
My wife's mother passed in June of 2018, and since then we've shared a series of losses of friends. My mom passed in January, followed by two more close friends in February and March. We share this grief as a couple, but each of us processes this grief differently. Is the grieving process gender-specific, or does it reflect our respective upbringings and experience?
Yes, to both. It can be gender-specific, very, very much so, in the way that people of different genders cope. So we know statistically that men will tend to drink too much, eat too much, and probably try to find a partnership pretty quickly if they've lost a partner. Or if they've lost a child, they will not necessarily talk about that loss. The divorce rate is very, very high for men and women who have lost children, and it will probably come from the male, or the male dominant partner wanting to get out of that partnership. In terms of how people deal with it, there are some things that are really common. Like there's no one right way to go through grief, but everybody has that first phase and reaches that first phase, which is emotional armor. I call it emotional armor, where we're numb or we're hysterical or we're feeling, despair or protest or those qualities. I see that emotional armor place as a resting place. And no matter where you are in what I call the phases, also known as the stages, where no matter where you are in those 11 phases, that you always go back to that emotional armor place as a respite.
You brought up a very interesting point about the difference between men and women. I remember someone saying many years ago, women grieve and men replace women.
I love it.
Is that true?
More often than not, yes. The way that men and women, in terms of their gender, are brought up is that women are taught that, and probably less so now in the new generations that are coming up. But in past generations, women gathered and women, gathered under their metaphorical red tent and told their stories and shared their pain, whereas men were taught to be the warriors and go out and, swallow your pain. And that's what they're taught within a family, is to swallow the pain, don't show your pain, don't be vulnerable, don't talk about what's going on. And thankfully, there are more men's groups now, and men are being raised, boys are being raised to express what's going on with them on a more emotional level. And so therefore they have an emotional vocabulary that men in past generations haven't necessarily had.
You shared earlier in the interview about putting on weight when you were young, and also talked about when certain people grieve, they have a tendency to overeat and put on weight. I remember as a kid, I put on a lot of weight. And for me, that was, in retrospect, I recognized in my 30s that was an emotional armor that I had put on to prevent a certain type of pain from taking place. Is that something that people do?
Yes. Yeah. It's so often, look, there is genetic weight gain and then there is emotional weight gain. And exactly, it becomes a protection. I can tell you that my weight was a way to protect myself, kind of like, listen, you don't get near me. And if you do get near me, know that I have got my protection and I've got my weight. And you can't get that close. I'm not going to let you get that close. And it definitely is emotional armor.
I had a great revelation in my 40s where I said, I don't need this weight anymore. And I actually had bariatric surgery because I recognized I could shed my armor and I still had within me the power to protect myself.
That's quite the journey to, and talk about grief. You know, if we talk just for a moment about grief and weight, it is a protection, and to let it go also means that you're letting go a protection, and yes, then you're ready to be in the world. But sometimes, I know for me, and I don't know if this happened for you, I didn't know how to navigate in the world as a thinner person. And I sometimes theorize that the reason the weight goes back on, because I did a lot of yo-yo dieting for a long time, was because I didn't know how to navigate in the world. And it became such a scary place to have attention on me that it was much easier to just go inside and put that weight back on.
In my work as an interfaith minister, and as we discussed earlier, there is no right or wrong when it comes to grief. Grief is an individual process. What are some of the different ways that people grieve?
And that's true. What I say is that grief is like your fingerprint. No one has the same fingerprint. And it is also an unexpected ally. And that unexpected ally is your teacher and how it teaches you. So again, we do all grieve differently, and we grieve. If you have a fixed personality, meaning that you like to do things a very specific way and you like to have an order to things, then the way you may grieve is looking for the order of that grief. That A has to follow B, has to follow C, and you need a template. Not that there is one, but if there isn't, you'll figure out what that template looks like. If you are more of a cardinal personality, which means that you just you say, I got this, and I don't really need a group. Actually, I could lead the group. You know, you might be a kind of person who you're used to, things come easy to you, and you're used to, knowing the answers. And this may be one place where you don't have it. But because you're used to acting like you do have it, you hide. And in that hiding, it becomes like a pressure, an internal pressure. And what we know is that sometimes from that, depression can occur. If you allow yourself to talk about that depression or share it, even though you may be that cardinal personality, that you actually have a chance to release, and you don't have to know exactly how to do it. So those are two kind of extremes, but everyone will deal with it differently. And some people will get stuck in a place. They might be stuck in their depression or their anxiety or their despair, or they may not want to go through the grieving process or mourn. And so they feel it's their way of holding on to what they've lost. And instead, what they're holding on to is not living.
We had touched upon this before in your book, It's Grief. You offer grief as big G's and little G's. Please give us an example of each.
Sure. So a big G is the loss of a loved one, husband, wife, child. A little G is you lost your job. You think you're going to be able to get another one, and but you've kind of gotten a little hit there, and so that's a little G. But when a little G isn't kind of taken care of, or there isn't a resolve, and then another little G comes up, and another, these unresolved little G's can accumulate and become a big G.
I guess people right now are going through a lot of these little G's in a cumulative sense.
Yeah, they are. And for some, they're facing big G's. If you've got a loved one in a nursing home or in a hospital and you can't see them and you can't be there to maybe help them even die with family members around. This is a big G. These are big Gs. The sense of isolation for some folks may be a big G. Even it may not be that way for you or for me, but for some folks, this isolation creates such anxiety that it's a big G. While for others, losing that job or being on furlough may be a little G, because perhaps it gives them a sense of, I've been wanting to leave that job anyway. I've got the time now to begin an exploration of who I want to be and who I want to become.
My guest is Edie Nathan. She's the author of the book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Edie, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
My website is edienathan.com. That's EDYNATHAN.com. And my book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss, can be found on Amazon.com. And that's the best place to find it.
And we'll be back with more of Edie Nathan and It's Grief after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
The student asks the teacher, "How do I experience transformation?" The teacher replies, "When the student is ready to receive deeper answers, the student then asks, 'How do I know what deeper questions to ask?' And the teacher replies, "When the student decides to commit to a practice inviting transformation, Level 2 questions will be revealed." Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, and as a teacher and host, I'm inviting listeners to enroll in the mastery of transformation by joining me on Decide to Transform, your bridge to Level 2 answers, Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Welcome back to the Dog Show. Up next, we have Satchmo. Satchmo is a member of the Shelter Pet Group.
That's right, a group known especially for their couch-snuggling, ball-chasing, face-licking, and, of course, companionship. Now, let's see him in action.
Look how he makes eye contact with his person.
That's actually known as the treat stare.
How intuitive, and now he appears to be excitedly turning in circles.
Ah, the happy dance so common with this group.
But really, the best way to know an amazing shelter pet like Satchmo is to meet one.
Visit theshelterpetproject.org today. Adopt.
Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Edie Nathan. She's the author of It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. What is the dance with grief, Edie?
The metaphor of the dance is that we must partner with it. If we don't partner with it, if we make it into an enemy, if we say, no, I don't want this, I don't want to have anything to do with this grief, this thing called grief, the more we try to ignore something, the bigger it gets. When we ask for its presence, when we ask for it to show us what we need to be working on, then you know what happens? Something miraculous happens. It actually becomes a teacher. It it shows us, where we are vulnerable, where we are yearning, where we are messy. It shows us so many things, what we have to work on. It's only in that partnership and that dance that grief can then not be something we fear, but something that we can partner with and walk with. And it's not about like saying it's going to go away. It's just going to lessen, and it lessens and it becomes more part of us because we're not working so hard to push it away.
So in essence, it's the invitation to dance with grief.
Yeah, it is. It is the invitation to dance with grief and to not be afraid of it.
What are the obstacles we face in this process and some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves?
Some of the greatest obstacles have to do with ourselves and our own innate nature to want to deny what we are feeling. And rather than welcoming what we feel, acknowledging what we feel, naming what we feel, we just want to often deny. And there is a healthy denial of death. There's a healthy denial of the things that get in our way. But sometimes instead of that denial, we really need to take in that which we don't want to look at and say, I want to move with this, and I want to learn from this. And that's overcoming an obstacle of denial.
And what are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves?
What do I need? Who can help me? How can I help myself? What am I yearning for? What's the hardest time of my day? And what are some of the things that I can do in the course of my day to interrupt my grief? Whether it's exercise, sitting down to journal, breathing, taking in 3 good deep breaths, reaching out to a friend, preparing a meal, listening to music. Those are 6, just off the top of my head. Elemental movements you can make as an interrupter to how grief can impede you from just having some internal peace.
You mentioned journaling, and I think that's so important, not only in grief process, but in many aspects of life. What is the essence of journaling? What does it do to tell our story to ourselves?
It wakes us up, right? It provides us with a witness, but the witness is us. It also enables us to take our narratives and those stories, those very, very precious stories, and give them some movement, because a lot of times they get stuck in us. They get stuck in our hearts, or they get stuck in our solar plexus, or they get stuck in our shoulders or our bellies. And this is a way to create some movement by actually putting word to paper, pen to paper. And I know we live in a world where we're always on the computer or always on our phones, but truly taking a pencil or a pen and writing down our thoughts, our feelings, actually allows us to take that which we're holding on to and have a witness and record. It's also a record. And in having that record, we can go back, we can say to ourselves, wow, this is where I was 3 months ago. That was a place I never thought I'd get out of. I'm not there right now. I'm in a different place. And if you hadn't written it down, you might not have remembered.
And there's also a visceral and sensual connection to the act of writing with a writing device and a piece of paper. Not only do you feel that connection, that energy flow through that, but also when you look back and see your writing and how your writing manifested, you may see changes that'll give you clues to help you.
That's exactly right. That you pinned it. I mean, that is so right. It is the manifestation. It is sensual. It is you're in your body. You're not just in your mind. You're not just in your fingertips. You're processing, like all of you. You're breathing. You're writing, and the manner that you write, the poetry, or actually maybe the way that the word is written, it doesn't maybe even make sense because it shows that the chaos that was going on in your brain. So that writing does so much in so many different ways.
What are some of the physical and behavioral manifestations of grieving?
The physical manifestations of grieving can be anything from shortness of breath to feeling listless, feeling exhausted, or feeling hyper, feeling like you can't actually calm yourself down. Anxiety, feelings of anxiety are often associated to anger. And believe it or not, when we're anxious, usually there's something that we're angry about. And if you can get to that sense of what am I angry about? And anger makes us tight. It tightens us. It makes our jaws often very, very tight. And perhaps for some folks, they're even grinding at night. So could be a physical manifestation. Eye focus is often affected physically. Our sense of taste is affected. Our sense of smell is affected. So those are certainly physical manifestations, and the emotional manifestations that join in with the physical, because the two really work together. The body mirrors what's going on emotionally, and emotionally the emotions mirror what's going on in the body. So if you're feeling that sense of anger, there may be a tightness in your heart, or it may be hard to catch that breath if you're feeling anxious. And to actually begin to identify, okay, so this is an emotional experience and this is a physical experience.
Are tears healing?
For some they are. For other people, they may not be, because for some people the narrative around tears is I'm weak. If you can change the narrative that it's an expression of an emotion and it's okay, great. But if that narrative can't be changed, then maybe the tears are not what are needed. And this may be a good opportunity to just say, because everyone grieves differently, so often the way that I might experience grief is not going to be the way you experience it. And I often suggest to people, don't assume that you know what a person is going through, even if what they're showing doesn't look like they're grieving or sad. It may be that's how they're showing up in their grief. And it doesn't mean anything, but that's the way they're showing up.
Thank you for sharing that. There's a concept called compound grieving. What does that mean?
So compound grieving is when you have many different situations of grief. It's complex. You've maybe lost multiple people, or you've lost a loved one, you've been ill yourself, you've lost a role of being a caretaker, and it is compounded. And it's really important when grief is compounded like that, or you are a survivor of trauma and you lose someone, you lose a loved one, and that traumatic experience, which you've put away, which you thought you may have dealt with, all of a sudden starts to come up. And so it's a compounding factor.
You have a chapter entitled Listen to Your Grief. What are we listening for?
So the listening to your grief is listening to how it comes into your world. And it's really knowing the self. Earlier I spoke about, being a fixed or cardinal personality, and listening to your grief is knowing yourself. So what I talk about is, are you underdistanced, overdistanced, or calibrated in the way you experience emotion? The more you understand yourself, and underdistanced means that you are kind of hysterical and you're crying and you're all over the place and your emotions are really chaotic. Overdistanced is like numb. You're not feeling anything at all. Calibrated is you can move between feeling maybe sometimes numb, sometimes a fuller emotional experience, but you're able to actually move between the two. And that's the goal, is to become calibrated. The other aspect of knowing the self is, are you an ambivert? Are you an introvert, or are you an extrovert? Because those three aspects will really help you understand the kind of help you need while you're grieving. And actually, all three of these aspects of the self, whether you're, the introverted, extroverted self, ambiverted self, the underdistanced, overdistanced self, the self that is fixed or mutable or cardinal, that all of these different aspects can help you listen to yourself, assess yourself, and then know the kind of help you need.
Her name is Edie Nathan. She's the author of It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. We'll be back with more of Edie after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, "That's rad." It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, "Totally," just shorter. As in, "I totes love going to the mall with Becca." Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, "Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case."
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Edie Nathan. She's the author of It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. We talked about some of the types of people and the types of the way they grieve. What are some of the archetypes of grief?
So the archetypes, let me just talk a little bit about what an archetype is just quickly. An archetype is a symbol or a character that we all know. I don't care what your background, I don't care where you are from. It's an image, for example, that we all know. So, for example, when I bring up the image of mother, all of us, I don't care where you live in the world, we all know what mother is. That is an archetype, a symbol that does not need explaining. So in the mother archetype, for example, in grief, if we had a good mother, then that mother's voice can often be a soothing voice as we're going through the grief process, as we're meeting our grief head on. But if we had the shadow of mother, a mother that undermined us or didn't support us, then it's very possible we don't have that good mother's voice internally. And the process of grief may be, and the gift of grief may be, we can't listen to the shadow mother. The shadow is what we don't want to look at, or the voice that is the negative voice. You're going to need to perhaps learn to be the good mother within yourself. And it's not going to be the symbolic mother you knew or had or have in your life. Maybe it's a new mother's voice and it becomes yours.
What about the archetype of the hero?
The hero. The hero's journey is very dear to me. And the hero, it is a hero's journey, certainly. And Joseph Campbell wrote extensively of the hero's journey to go through grief. The hero needs something to fight for. So in your grief, you're fighting for your life. You're fighting to get through a process that sometimes takes you down a very, very dark, scary road. And the hero within you saves you, rescues you, shows you a different path, shows you that, like the story of the Wizard of Oz, which is definitely a hero's journey, that you've got those shoes, you've had them all the time, and you've got the power of the healing that exists within you, and you can be your own hero. The shadow of the hero is that unless the hero has something to fight for, they often feel lost. They often feel like, what am I doing here? I don't know what my role is. And if you partner with grief in such a way that you need it because it makes you feel important, or it makes you feel it's the only way to be seen, then you're using grief in a way that won't allow you to heal. So be a hero and get in touch with the power that you yield, but don't use it to stay where you are.
More heroic to move forward in the understanding than to stay and just put your armor on.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And to stay, part of the hero's journey is that you must go into the darkness of the cave, because that's where you learn about yourself. That's like the underworld of the soul, if you will. And when you get into the underworld of the soul, it's so rich and it's painful, and you must look at yourself in a mirror when you get there. But if you don't leave that place and you just stay there, then really you can't go back to a new ordinary life, a new order of things. And this journey of grief is finding your new order.
You detail, in significant detail, 11 phases of grief in your book, It's Grief. Please share a brief description of these 11 phases.
Oh, I don't think we've got the time. But let me just say that I'd like to just give a quick reason why I chose 11 phases, because so many people will say, oh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was an amazing, amazing woman. She got us out of our denial around grief and loss. What she created in her 5 stages of grief, they were really 5 stages for people who were dying. These are the 5 stages that people go through when they are dying. It wasn't really meant so much for people who were the survivors. It was for people who were going through the deathing experience. So these 11 phases, I see them as we're moving in and out of them. And unlike the stages that are kind of like you go from one to the next, The phases don't do that. I see the first phase, the emotional armor phase. Yes, we almost all go through that first phase of denial and numbness and despair and protest. We all go through that. And it's a place that we always go back to. It's kind of like our resting place. The other phases, whether it's role confusion or anger and rage or anxiety or forgiveness or grace or sadness, that they move in and out of one another, and sometimes they layer, and there are multiple layers. So I've got my anger, and I've got my forgiveness, and I've got my sadness, and they're all having a conversation. And that's what happens when we're grieving, is that there are these multiple emotional conversations that are going on, and there's no one right path that we follow.
And to understand these phases, pick up her book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss, because she goes into tremendous detail on these 11 phases that she described, and you may find within yourself some answers that you're looking for. Now, at this time of physical isolation, what would you offer to those suffering losses and unable to be present with their loved ones?
One of the things I've been suggesting to everyone is, we talked about journaling. I'd love for you to write letters to the people you can't reach or the people you've lost, and share what you're missing, what you feel you've lost in their absence, or the part of you that you feel you're losing in this isolation. Also, make a recording. You can record yourself on Zoom. You can record yourself on many applications, even on your phones, so that you have a living record of what you're experiencing. The other piece is, don't do this alone. I don't. Even if you're an introvert, you probably have one person who's your person. And share with them what's going on. And the other part of this is all hard stuff. And if you're having trouble even recognizing what you're feeling, there are wonderful lists. And if you contact me at edinathan.com and say, hey, I heard that you on this show, I will send you a list of positive and negative cognitions. And I will send you a list also of emotions, because often we can't even name the emotions that we're going through. We can say anger and we can say that we're frustrated, but the reality is that there are so many more names to what we're experiencing. And I'm happy to send you those lists. Just go onto my website.
And Christians normally would have wakes where they would gather together. Jews have a thing called Shiva, where people come to the home after the funeral for the days after the funeral takes place and bring comfort to those who are bereaved. Is there a way of doing that without physical contact?
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned these rituals, and our rituals are so important, and it's what keeps us going. So one of the things that, I don't know if you've ever done this, but, you pass around a recipe or, amongst friends. So one of the things that you can do is create a memory book, and it's a memory log, and you start it and you send it and you ask your friends to pass it around. And it's a sharing of memories. It's a sharing of, and you can do this either through video, or you can do it, just even as a collective letter, and just keep adding to the letter and adding to the letter. And in this letter are memories or notes or a story from your loved one. And this is a collection that becomes like a funeral, becomes a living eulogy, if you will.
And what coping skills would you offer to those grieving isolation, loss of work, and the other dramatic and unprecedented events we're experiencing because of the pandemic?
The biggest one is, don't do this alone, and find your people, join things, exercise. Even if you're living in a 250 square foot studio apartment, and I know a lot of New Yorkers are living in very, very small spaces, create a little area where that can be a meditative area. Create a little area, and you can be the same area where maybe you do 10 sit-ups, 10 push-ups every day, or jump rope, or go online and find chat rooms, people who are of like mind, either in your specialized field, or people who write, or people who love music, people who love the same kind of music, because right now things are popping up all over the place. So again, be a joiner or find your person and make sure you touch base and keep to your daily rituals. Make a schedule for yourself. Make sure you're getting up in the morning, you're having your breakfast. Make sure that you stay on point with your schedule.
Absolutely. Do the things that are routine, that keep you in touch with your normal life before this happened, and will continue after this is over. My guest, Edie Nathan, her book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Edie, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your amazing work.
You can find me at edienathan.com, and you can find my book on Amazon.
Edie, thank you so much for joining us and for your wonderful guidance and advice for those who are processing grief at this time.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.